what I'm saying. I think that's what we got now.
Good afternoon. I'd like to call to order the Thursday, April 5th, 2018 Board of Adjustment meeting. Can I get a roll call, please?
Hayes.
Here.
Stein.
Here.
Dargis Johnson.
Here.
Dolly.
Here.
Hanson.
Here.
Culhane.
Here.
Ford.
Here.
Megan Olson is absent. We have a quorum.
All right. First item on the agenda is the approval of the March 22nd, 2018 minutes.
I have a correction on that. I know I'm famous for my motions to adjourn. I'm really good at it, but I didn't make that motion to adjourn last week because I wasn't here. So I'm good, but not that good.
So is your motion to approve with that adjustment?
My motion is to approve of that adjustment.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Second item on the agenda is the application for the City of Watertown Park and Rec Forestry, seeking the conditional use for the approval of the sale of alcoholic beverages. Jill, could you take us through that one, please?
Okay. The Watertown Parks, Rec, and Forestry Department seeks approval to allow for the ongoing sale, serving, and consumption of alcoholic beverages at the Premier Softball Complex. Approval would enable eligible groups with the proper City Council-approved alcoholic beverage licenses and lease agreements to include alcohol as a concession to be consumed on site. Bar Tavern is a listed conditional use for the C1 Community Commercial District per 21-24-034, and other uses which, in the opinion of the Board of Adjustment, are of the same in general character may be approved per 21-24-0327. The definition of bar or tavern is as follows. Any establishment, including restaurants and gambling establishments, licensed to sell alcoholic beverages for consumption upon the premises where sold or provided. The term bar or tavern shall also include establishments licensed to sell alcoholic beverages for consumption off the premises where sold. The site plan reflects or does not reflect the following requirements of the ordinance. Section 210202 2B7A through H, specific rules governing individual conditional uses, requires this board's consideration of such things as ingress, egress, off-street parking, loading, screening, buffering, signage, exterior lighting, required yards and open space, and general compatibility. You can, your agenda packet includes sheets 40 and 46, which is the landscape or the site landscaping plan that was originally submitted for this complex. 2.0102 location no longer applies to the C1 zone, so we don't have to consider that. Chapter 2163, off-street parking and loading requirements and engineering design standards. Again, your agenda packet includes sheets 45 and 46 of the original submitted site plans, and that is regarding parking lot and site landscaping plans. Chapter 2165, outside storage and display requirements for specific uses. Neither outside displays of merchandise nor outside storage were specifically addressed yet. And per 216502, outside storage and displays of commercial uses, merchandise which is offered for sale, rental, or lease may be displayed beyond the confines of a building. Signage has not yet been specifically addressed. And Chapter 2173, landscape and lighting standards, adequate screening of a parking lot from adjacent residentially used property shall be provided, and dumpsters must be screened per 217304 3 and 4. And per 217303, interior parking lot trees are shown in the plans on sheet 46, but have not yet been planted, and 88 other trees are to be planted according to the landscape plan, sheet 46. Regarding Titles 5, 18, 21, 24, in regards to sidewalk, curb gutter, subdivision, etc., the property lacks basic boulevard infrastructure, curb gutter, sidewalk, trees. Still, this is a city-owned property, and boulevard infrastructure will be completed as street improvements and connectivity projects are warranted or budgeted. This board must determine if satisfactory provision and arrangement has been made concerning 210202 2B7A through H and the chapters and titles mentioned. If application is endorsed, the board may consider conditions of approval, such as specifying or limiting the areas of consumption, timely fulfillment of any all lacking boulevard infrastructure requirements, and or any other conditions the board deems necessary. There was one adjacent landowner who did contact us, and the adjacent landowner is, I believe, up in this area here, Schmaling, and she supports this request.
Thank you, Joe. I'd like to open the public hearing. If anybody's here to speak on behalf or against, please approach the microphone and state your name for the record.
Good afternoon. My name is Jay DeLang. I'm the director of the Parks, Recreation, and Forestry Department. And I'd just like to add that this was an agenda item at the last Parks, Recreation, and Forestry Board meeting, and they motioned to recommend to the Board of Adjustment to approve conditional use for malt beverage sales at Premier Softball Complex.
Thank you, Jay.
Excuse me. Sorry. Jay, did the Park and Rec Board talk about hours of operation, how late beer sales would go? Are beer sales going on when there's underage minors and games going on? How does that all work?
Well, this is actually going to be the adult softball complex, Premier Softball Complex. The youth activities are going to be handled at Cook Complex. So the only exceptions would be if there would be a weekend tournament type thing, and then alcohol sales would not be allowed at that time. We are working on a lease agreement, and that would be part of the language, and it would probably state something that, under 18 or something like that. But we're still working on that document.
So to further up, a follow-up, so this would prohibit that individuals from bringing their own alcohol onto the site as well? Exactly,
which would be a wonderful thing for the concessionaires to administer it too, and make it much, much easier for them.
Are you going to require those underage that are playing in softball events that aren't 21 to wear wristbands, or to find a way so that you can distinguish who can and can't purchase beer?
In the tournaments we held out there last summer, actually the ones that could purchase were given wristbands.
Okay.
Did we have any complaints or issues last year with the sale of beverages there?
No, it actually went very, very well.
And then follow-up question. Last year we talked about including the language for excluding the parking lots from the beverage consumption. Would we be opposed to including that again this year?
I would not at all. I would consider that it would just be the green space within the softball complex.
Okay. Jay, what are the specific dates of this again?
Basically, it will be the entire season. It will be both for leagues and tournaments. So it depends. Early May through into October. There's some later tournaments that we had last year, so it's hard saying the exact last date, but normally most of the leagues are completed in August.
Well, whose license are you using?
The city would end up getting a license, is that
right?
Okay, so I heard something about Prairie Winds. Prairie Winds doesn't have anything to do with this?
No.
Okay.
So the city would actually obtain a license, and then they would lease that license to somebody to buy and sell the beer, or how does that work?
No, the city would enter into a lease with Lake City Softball, and Lake City Softball will actually be the alcohol licensee.
Okay.
Is this the same thing you did last year?
Last year we just did it for 2 weekend tournaments. This would be for the entire
that's
duration.
That's where I thought there was some specific dates, but now you're talking about basically the whole summer.
Right, because they would have the sales out there. For an adult type concession, without the alcohol sales, it'll be pretty difficult to make the concession be a go.
How do you police not allowing people to bring their own beer in? How was that done? Or what's the proposal?
Well, the Lake City Slow Pitch Board, they would request people not to bring it in, and then if there was a problem, we would call the police department in.
It would be similar to how a bar might see somebody with their own alcohol and, police it that way, call the police, try to kick them out, that sort of thing.
I can see that, but a bar has walls and a defined area. Whereas this is more a wide open space.
Exactly.
And I could see the potential for abuse rising just because of the vast nature of the area. So are there any more specifics other than the association will just watch?
Well, there is a state law that it is a Class 2 misdemeanor for someone to bring that alcohol in, so there is some teeth that if it does become a problem, you know, we can be in contact with the police department and actually arrest people if necessary.
Will there be a person assigned to that particular activity, or will it just be a general lookout?
I would say, you know, unless there becomes a problem, it would be routine patrol.
An analogous situation would be the golf course. Similarly, they have an alcohol license there, and technically it's illegal to bring your own alcohol onto the golf course.
And would it be fair to say, Jay, that with respect to most of the attendees to these events, they're trying to support the effort and therefore would not necessarily be so inclined to bring their own alcohol anyway?
Exactly, and you know, the way it went last year, prices were maintained at a reasonable amount, and everybody accepted it. And I think they probably had two situations where they had folks bring their coolers back to their cars, and that was the only thing. Else, it was very well accepted because I spent quite a little time out there at both events last year, and it went over very well.
Sorry.
I understand what you're thinking.
Is this becoming more and more commonplace in different places that host that they actually, the cities serve their alcohol? Is that the trend?
Yes, I would say that's quite commonplace throughout the state.
And maybe as far as the tree planting, that's already been approved and this just hasn't done, so we don't really need to address that.
And we actually do have quite a few trees planted out there now.
Staff has no recommendations one way or the other?
The only thing I would like to clarify is that unless somebody sees fit to do differently, this would just be an approval with no time limits on it, not seasonal, not anything, just in case there was some kind of a winter event or who knows what could come up. It would just be an open-ended instead of time-framed event.
And if there were complaints, we could always bring them back next year and review the permit?
Correct. Complaints would come back to you.
I'll make a motion to approve.
Second. Got a motion and a second. All in favor?
You didn't close. I'm sorry. I jumped the gun. You didn't close the public hearing.
Good. Was there anybody else to speak on behalf or against while the public hearing's open? Seeing none, ask for a motion.
I'll make a motion to approve as presented.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Brings us to motion to adjourn.
Me?
Stein with the motion. Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. We're adjourned. All right, I'd like to call to order the Thursday, April 5th, 2018 City Plan Commission meeting. Can I get a roll call, please?
Case.
Here.
Stein. Here. Dargis Johnson.
Here.
Dolly.
Here.
Hanson.
Here.
Cohen.
Here.
And Olson is absent. And for the record, Chairman Stoneberger has stepped down.
Thank you, Brandy. First item on the agenda is the approval of the agenda. Can I get a motion?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes. Second item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes from the March 22nd, 2018 meeting.
I have a revision to make to that.
Okay.
Diana Ford pointed out that so in her, where I was quoting her for the discussion of the potential ordinance amendment adding, or no, the sign code. Sorry. That there needs to, the last sentence in the 6th paragraph to, instead it says, reduction in home sales since the signs were removed. It says sales, so that just needs to be changed to sign. So I will make that fix.
Noted. Do we have a motion to approve with the revision?
So moved.
Motion by Case.
Second.
Second by Colhane. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Third item on the agenda is a resolution amending the zoning district boundaries by rezoning a portion of Outlot A of the Prairie Hills Development Second Edition. Brandy, can you walk us through that, please?
Yep. So this was submitted by the petitioner, Dennis Arnold, who is the acting president of Arnold Construction, which he's the owner of the area which he is working on subdividing and rezoning. Currently, we just have the rezone in front of us, which he's proposing to change from the existing agricultural district to RG, which is the residential garage district. The petitioner submitted application and petition on March 6, 2018, requesting approval for rezoning the current described property from agricultural district to RG. The applicant seeks to rezone this area to provide for additional parking across from Hidden Valley Residential District or for the neighboring owners to construct residential garages for residential storage. A plat of this area will be coming forward as information is presented to the city engineering department after the developer and his engineer have correspondence with the state and federal agencies related to the potential impacts to wetlands or other cultural resources. If a plat does not come forth within 1 year, the rezone will be null and void, which that language is included in the resolution. Some facts about this area. It is part of Outlot A currently, which is surrounded by the existing agricultural district to the east, and then single-family residential district to the north, south, and east, and then R3 multi-family residential district to the west, which is actually what we just looked at a couple weeks ago with the plat of Hidden Valley. So this will be on the east side of Pompesca Drive. As per the petition, it's a requirement that the petitioner obtain 55% of the adjacent landowners to the property that he's proposing to rezone, as well as 55% of the property owners within 250 feet, who are all, or who will be notified, or who have been notified of this proposal, and they all have signed off. And in your packet, it doesn't show all of the signatures, but yesterday actually he did bring, he has obtained more, although what was included in your packet was sufficient for the meeting the 55%. The only one that he is not, he hasn't gotten one. I think that's it. Ready for questions.
Thank you, Brandy. I'd like to open the public hearing. If anybody's here to speak on behalf or against, please approach the microphone.
How much of that area is even buildable?
That's what we're waiting to hear back. So these, upon talking with his engineer, lot 1 and 2 have sufficient buildable area, but lot 3
is questionable. Lot 4 needs some mitigation done. So that is why we didn't bring the plat with this rezone. Now, the rezone process takes longer than the platting process. So he asked that we keep this moving forward, and that's why if a plat never does come forth, that this would become null and void before a year. But that's where he can work with the Corps to get permits to mitigate and enhance. And the reason why we didn't want to bring that plat is because he owns the outlots, so then he has room to work with then.
What's the reasoning with the gap there between lots 3 and 4?
That's pretty much inundated with wetland.
Okay.
I can pull that up here and show you.
I don't know if the GIS is as good as, but I looked at Google Maps before, and it sort of follows, the slough follows where the little lots are.
Mm.
And it depends on how much fill is necessary for the garage and the buildable area and for his setbacks, because he's still going to have a 25-foot rear yard setback. So he was working with his engineer to incorporate as much wetland as he could so that it would leave more buildable area for the garages. And then also, it'll depend on what permit they need from the Corps, depending on how much fill is necessary. So that's what we're waiting to hear from his engineer.
So regardless, if we decide to move forward with the rezoning and they can't bring back a plat that meets the minimum lot area requirements, that would then after a year this would go away.
Mm-hmm. Yep, and that language is in the resolution. And right now what is shown to be platted does meet the minimum lot area requirement, but to ensure the community that we're platting something that they would be able to build on, that's why we're waiting to hear that.
The reason I'm asking is I'd hate to see us plat something that meets the minimum lot area that have to go through a variance process to build. Because if that was the case, there's no point in rezoning it.
Right. Which, yeah, so when they work with showing where the wetlands are and what needs to be done as far as mitigation and the permits to the Corps, then before we would bring a plat forward, we would want to ensure that there was sufficient buildable area, and not just minimal necessarily either.
Any other questions from the board? I'll close the public hearing then. Ask for a motion.
I'll move to approve as proposed.
A motion by Kays.
Second.
Second by Colhane. Any additional discussion?
I will just briefly mention that I do like the reversion back so if this isn't hanging out, the rezone isn't hanging out there if there isn't a plat brought forward.
And then also just to make sure that even though if it comes back and they show that they have sufficient land, I don't think, if I was still on the board a year or two from now, I won't be very thinking kindly to a variance request, just for the record.
All in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Item 4 on the agenda is a presentation of the lot coverage proposal.
Okay, so as we talked the last meeting, the Mayor's Affordable Housing Committee has discussed creating a district or zoning district for affordable housing for single-family residential, and tentatively we're calling that R1A. But that's subject to change, as with any of these things. But we wanted to get some images with different lot coverages, so then you guys could start to decide what was appropriate for this district. So we would expect smaller minimum lot size requirements, smaller setback requirements, allowance of shared walls between homes on separate conforming lots, restriction on lot coverage of impervious surfaces, maximum structure size, and restriction on driveway width abutting public right-of-way. So currently in our ordinance, the definition of lot coverage is defined as that portion of a lot covered with structures and hard surfaces such as parking and loading and storage. Now these next couple slides are just some examples of PUDs or R2As that we currently have in ordinance and at our zoning districts. So Northridge was done as a PUD. It has smaller lots, narrower streets. It does not have maximum lot coverage or structure size, which is why we coined that as less affordable, because there were no restrictions, so big houses could be built on small lots. Dakota Commons, so here is what our current R1 single family residential district requirements are, and then this is what Dakota Commons was approved for. So just 7-foot setbacks versus 9-foot, and then the rear yard was smaller as well because they were incorporating the common green space, and then the 8,000 square foot lot size, so just a little bit smaller. The R2A, and we discussed that last plan commission meeting, why we didn't go with that district, and the mayor had explained that that would create a lot of nonconformities as R2A can have no new development. So the minimum lot area for that district is 6,000 square feet, and also has 6-foot side yard setbacks are the main differences. Oh, and 50-foot lot width which is what we'd be proposing for R1A. So then just to look at a couple examples, this lot is located in Northridge. So these are larger lots than what we would be looking at, and we'll scale it down. But for the amount of impervious lot coverage, this equals 49%, so about 50-50. And then on the smaller lots, I also included how big the actual structure was as well. But for this one, we're at 49%. This is also in the Northridge development, and this is at 41.3%, and that is including the large driveway, triple driveway, and the shed in the back. So then this is very comparable to what the lot sizes would be of the R1A district, and I thought it was a nice comparison that they were all side by side, so you can really decide and determine what is appropriate for lot coverage percentage. So 308 down here, as you can see, with the structure, 17% of the lot is covered, and then with the impervious surfaces, which are very minimal, obviously, that's why that's 19%. And then 314 is at 30% with the structure, and then 45% with the impervious surfaces, which you can see also the garage is towards the alley, which I think is a nice feature that could be utilized with this district. And then 318, 36% of structure coverage and 49% of impervious. And then 322 is 16% and 19% of the structure and impervious. So we'll come back to this one because I think this helps make a lot of decisions. But moving on, we have over here, this is also in the Northridge development, and this is kind of showing what the duplex situation would be like. This is a 50-foot lot, so that would be necessary to be conforming. And then whatever we would decide for the maximum structure and impervious surface percentage, then that would be included with a shared wall, which should maximize, using less building materials and then also more green space if there's a maximum structure size. And the impervious surfaces on this structure or on this lot are 36%, and the structure itself is 28%, which is still an 1,800 square foot house. This structure is 21% of the lot is covered with the structure itself, 30% with all of the impervious surfaces. And as you can see, the driveway is for a single stall, which is something we would want to look at for where what we're allowing for curb cuts onto public right-of-ways. This property is 54% covered with impervious surfaces. The house alone covers 42%. Again, single stall driveway. And then this lot is 87% covered with impervious surfaces and 54% with the structure itself. So how we'll regulate by having a minimum lot area, which we've talked previously about being 5,000 square feet. And then these are arbitrary. I just put them in there. But we would need to decide what the allowance was for impervious lot coverage percentage, and then as well as the structure coverage percentage. And then the maximum approach width at curb for a public street, and side yard setback, and then front yard and rear yard as well. Yeah, we can.
Okay. I don't have a problem with the 12-foot maximum approach of the curb if that's at 50 foot, but if I'm on a corner lot and I'm a 50 by 100 is the depth, I don't know why the 12-foot curb cut would be necessary on a 100-foot side of the lot. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Like if
You're talking about a 12-foot when if the frontage is 50, but if I'm on a corner lot and I've got a 50 by 100, I don't think the 12-foot really needs to matter there. I could have a wider, because maybe I'm going to have a 2-stall garage coming off that side. You see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So I think I would ratchet that down to based on the frontage that you're putting your ingress and egress off of.
Okay.
Have a matrix based on the frontage size.
I'm thinking too, if I take a 50 by 100 lot and I apply even just a 5-foot setback for rear side yards and a 20-foot front yard, that's 2,250 feet, or 45% of the lot's already going to setbacks. So my recommendation is that I would go away from the 6-foot side yard and go with a 5-foot side yard. It still meets you 10 feet between structures for fire code purposes. And if we're talking about wanting to make a lot buildable and affordable, you want to be able to maximize the use of that lot, so we don't have to come back and be dealing with variance requests down the road. And if we go with the 5, that's an absolute for me. I like the idea of a 35% structure coverage, because that's for this again. If I've got 45% of the lot is tied up into setback and another 35% is into structure, now I'm already at 80%. Then 20% is probably what you were showing there before would be pretty common for normal other impervious driveways, what have you.
Mm-hmm.
Keep
My
in
comments.
mind on the side setback that there's an overhang that's not counted, right, Jill? So if you have a 2-foot overhang on a house, you really only got a 3-foot setback.
Do you measure
We measure from the foundation.
From the sidewalls? You could restrict the overhang to 18 inches. And then you're still sitting at 7.5 feet between structures.
I think we should get the fire marshal involved in making sure we're doing something safe.
Yeah, that's fine. I'm just saying, but you have to look at too. If it's a 50-foot lot, and if I put 6 and 6, now I've just added another 200 feet of space that you can't use for construction, and then you're limiting you're limiting structure size, which eventually will ask people coming in and ask for variances, and so that's my point. If you want to create more work for this board, and moving forward, my recommendation is let's build something that people will use, that we don't have to have variance requests.
Was that one of the caveats of this district, though, that it would not be subject to variance?
Technically, I don't think you can do that.
I don't know how you do that, but
I would love to do it, but
I've heard that.
I would love to do it, and I've probably even thrown it out, but I just don't think technically. I think anybody can ask for anything that they feel
Yeah.
aggrieved against by an ordinance, or it's causing an undue hardship.
Right.
At least there'd be options for other zoning districts.
That or you decide in this district that you measure from the eaves.
I don't think we want to do that because we have a standard where we measure, and I don't want to have two standards that the staff has to remember what zone you're in and all of that.
I would like as we move forward with this discussion, and if we are going to go with this 6 foot aspect of it, I would like to see some actual layouts, have somebody draw out where a certain size house could be located, and where the driveway, if it's a tuck behind garage in the back or whatever. And the other thing would be is like if it's a 5 foot, that's based upon no alley. Now if I have an alley, then I would look at a 20 foot in the rear and a 20 foot on the front. Mm-hmm. Then we're really then we're talking small.
See, and I thought about that too, and there is that concept of having the alley, and then if you have your garage parallel to it, then you don't need the 20-foot setback, where then you could maybe minimize the rear yard setback.
Through a design, yeah, I understand what you're saying. No.
I also think that corner lots need to be bigger so that you're not violating and asking for variances all the time on the setback.
Yep.
So we didn't say that on here, but corner lot needs to be about 1,900 square feet bigger just to be equal.
Right.
The 50-foot wide lots would be really difficult to do a parallel access garage and have it usable.
In the winter, especially in the wintertime.
Only cars are allowed in this district.
The other thing I'm thinking about too is if we're talking about the lot, I think the lot is one small piece of the puzzle when you're talking about affordable housing and trying to offer opportunities. I think it's also with if it's a specific new district, I think we need to have the conversation on what the design standards need to be for that district. Would we allow an R1A district to have smaller lots, which gives me more density, which allows me to put more structures in, but at the same time reduce the width of streets, reduce parking requirements so that I'm using and consuming less land, which then would also reduce the cost for development to move forward? I like this concept, but I think it's also we need to be talking about how we incorporate that into new divisions, new subdivisions where we can have different design requirements. It's all about cost.
We're looking at the design standards for the infrastructure as well, but I would definitely argue against having a different street width standard for a higher dense or a different lot size, because the street standard should be based on the classification of roadway, whether it's a local access or
Agreed.
a collector street. And we are looking at narrower road standards for everywhere, just because we're building them probably wider than they need to be.
Mm-hmm.
And someone can always propose a wider street than our minimum standard. No one ever does. They always beg to be narrower because it's very expensive, and it's expensive for us to maintain in perpetuity as well. And we're not there yet with the design standards, but we're definitely looking at that for that same reason that you're talking about.
I guess I have a question just because I'm catching up on this. Are you going to spot zone some of these residential areas?
Well, when we talked about whether spot zoning would be, what would be considered a spot zone, and we didn't come up with any recommendation yet on that. But that's part of the conversation. Like,
okay.
Should it have to be at least a block, or maybe a half block?
Okay.
So,
but if you were going to have a whole new development started, you mentioned garages from the backside. I mean, is that going back to the alleys? I know a lot of people love the alley concept.
I don't think we're going back to alleys.
Okay.
I don't think that that's affordable.
So these homes, what I have envisioned then is this maybe 2-stall garage with a single access drive coming up to a double garage, max probably, right? This would not be a development with 3 stalls of garage out front and the house tucked behind that, because that's how they'd have to kind of sit on a 50-foot lot.
Right. Yes. And it would be pretty limited in what you could do on this. And it isn't going to be probably feasible to meet the area requirements with a big garage. So it's not going to be for everybody. And I'm envisioning, too, that if this is a starter house type of a neighborhood, that some of them wouldn't have garages, and they'd want to reserve enough room for a garage later. But that's not necessarily a requirement that you're going to have a garage, and probably not a 3-stall garage unless you get pretty creative in how you can lay that out on such a narrow lot.
Could you combine two 12-foot approaches if they were butted together? Would that be
Sure.
I'm
Yes.
just asking because it says 12 feet, so I just want to make sure.
Right, and that's what I was picturing with the shared wall on the lot line with the duplexes. And I would, if we go back to that Northridge one, this is probably an excellent example. If you would draw that, that lot is 6,300 square feet. So it's obviously, if it's 50 foot wide, it's greater than 100 foot deep. And if you took that 100 foot deep, what are we getting at for percentages? That's probably exactly what we're looking at right there. And this is done, it's a PUD, but similar to what we're looking at.
From an engineering standpoint, could you give us a recommendation of what you think the maximum total impervious surfaces would be, from a calculation standpoint for, increased runoff? What should we be looking for?
I don't think that's an engineering concern as much as it is a neighborhood desirability concern, because a small lot starts to look like a sea of concrete pretty quickly compared to a large lot, which is why I want to limit that. And actually, I am seeing these drawings for the first time right along with you. Brandy's been working really hard right up to the last second, and we haven't had time to talk about it. So I really didn't know what to expect.
And yeah, so if I've said anything, it's not. These might just be all my thoughts.
No, they're good thoughts. Good thoughts.
Doing well.
With direction. I mean, we've talked about it, so I kind of knew where we wanted to go.
Yeah, but this is what I was envisioning, and I think I can speak for the committee when we're talking about what would be desirable. We don't want to make a zone that nobody wants near them. It's not going to be for every neighborhood, and it may never get used if we clench it down too tightly.
I guess piggybacking on what Rhonda was saying, I mean, we could put a requirement in there if we wanted to take an R2 or an R3 or an R2A and upzone it based upon a certain geographic amount of area. But could I take an R1 and downzone it to an R1A?
Yeah, that's. I mean, we need to have those
I mean,
conversations.
that's the how we can build this, and it's another 9/16 inch wrench in the toolbox. But if everything's metric out there, it doesn't really matter.
For the RG district, we say that the minimum has to be an acre. So if that would work for this, so it wouldn't be spot zoning. Sorry, I might have just jumped in on that too. I was trying to measure.
Well, I think if we're talking a half block and it's a 300-foot block and we've got 6 lots, that to me, like a half block would be the probably bare minimum that you'd want to do.
And that's
so
less than an acre.
Yeah.
If you had 100-foot deep lots for a 300-foot lot, that's 30,000 square feet.
Yeah, 3/4 of an acre.
So that's less than an acre, and maybe that's a good way to look at it.
Our blocks are generally about 350 rule of thumb.
Our new blocks are gigantic,
right?
And but if you look at a traditional block where we used to do 300 to 400 feet between roads,
right,
then that would be 3/4 of an acre would be
right. About
and
right.
if you're platting out rights of way in there and you're zoning. We've used right-of-way. We've included right-of-way in that acre for the RG district in the past. I actually kind of disagree with that, but I know that's been our practice.
Well, maybe it's simplest. It's 3/4 of an acre if it's virgin land, or rezoning land, or a minimum half block, depending on how we just come up with a definition of what we mean by a half block. A standard half block, if it's where I live, it's 4th Street between 14th Avenue and 13th Avenue. The east side, that would be a half block.
Right. I would think a half block would be
The small
enough to not be considered a spot zone.
I agree.
But if you're getting individual lots sprinkled throughout, that would be a spot zone.
And that could be really nice for the redevelopment of neighborhoods too. That if you set a half block, so then you weren't just having them randomly tossed here and there.
I was actually approached by a builder wondering how are you going to, I don't know right the word to say this, but to stop them from getting overpriced from being that entry-level home.
You can't. I know that's our intent.
Well, can you, I mean, is there some covenances that should be addressed at this point saying that, you know, the 3-stall garage, whether it's tandem or not, is just not allowed because that does add, you know, more value than the little house over here that only had the single stall. If you're going to keep it as your entry-level homes, you know, because that's what we, you know, everybody wants to get into a home and then move up as their family grows and their needs grow. I mean, couldn't some covenances be set on this if a whole new development came in saying, you know, that it's only a maximum of a double-stall garage? You can't have the, you know, pushed out to the backyard. And I know you'll have the maximum building area on it, but it just, I don't know, just that maybe needs to be looked at because that's kind of the direction Northridge went, was way over what, you know, that was supposed to be our entry level, and it's really not anymore. So
I feel that all we should be doing is setting the basement, and the basement is the minimum lot area, and if it's based upon the maximum lot coverage or whatever you want to call it, that's the minimums. Then you let the market decide if I can build a house with a 3-stall garage, but it's a tuck under, what does it matter? And I could do that. I could put a 3-stall garage with a house on top of it, and on a 50-foot lot, and let the market dictate. Sioux Falls, the minimum lot size for most of the residential zones is a 5,000 square foot lot. But yeah, they don't all build on that, but that's the minimum, and let the market dictate what you want to go from there.
Do they have maximum lot coverage?
I can't remember off the top of my head, but I know that the minimum lot for most of the residential zones is 5,000 square feet.
So for this example, up on the screen, this, I don't know if you guys can see that line very well, but that outlines approximately what would be 5,000 square feet. So if it was the structure itself, it would be 36% lot coverage, and then with all of the impervious surfaces, it would be 46%. Which is actually, on that chart is that was my choice of what just from looking at these different examples.
You suggested 46?
For 45.
45. Yeah. And I'm open to that. I think that's a reasonable limit. And Todd, you had mentioned before that the definition that we use could be improved on.
I look at lot coverage. You use lot coverage to include all impervious surfaces, and that's primarily from a stormwater calculation ordinance perspective, what I call more of an engineering perspective. Most planning and zoning use lot coverage generally to mean just the structural elements, the houses, the accessory buildings.
But really, I'm looking at it more from an aesthetic perspective of not wanting the whole yard to be paved.
And I'm fine with the way you want to maintain your existing definition. I like the fact that she says we're going to limit the amount of buildings on it at 35% of the lot, and we're going to limit the whole impervious. You're treating it. So I'm fine with the way Brandy's put it together. I think it's fine.
That was after discussion with Luke. It made me wrap my head around it.
On the structure piece, what about like decks and that sort of thing? Is that considered structure? Decks or patios?
Well, they are.
They would be an accessory.
Yeah.
But I guess it's either that or you just decide to say it's 45%, and then if you decide, I mean, I don't want to make this cumbersome for enforcement either. So if we're comfortable that 45% is the fine, I just hate to see a tiny house with a really big basketball court put on there as well.
Well, they all have the same budget for coverage.
But you see what I'm saying? Just because I could have a lot of asphalt or cement put on the ground, and just a teeny tiny, 64 square foot house. I don't think we want that either.
I am curious on this example here. So you get the two that are about half the coverage of the other examples, right? So what I'm curious about is the market pricing difference between those two structures. Is there a significant market price difference? So if we're talking about low-cost housing.
The absence of garages. Rhonda, what do you say about that?
Absence of garages is very tough. Everybody wants a garage, especially if they're going to be the homeowner now. They've moved up from the rental property, where they maybe didn't have that garage. That's kind of the, I want a garage, and that's part of the reason they maybe are buying. So, but, the one on the bottom there would have room to do a garage. I guess they both would. See, there's my alley again.
That one is an alley. Right.
So that kind of gives you that, I hear lots of people like the alley. I know they don't make any sense with cleaning snow and all that good stuff, but the alley has probably served its purpose in its day. But
there's
it
developments.
does.
There's developments, and you go to the cities, you go to Wisconsin, where there's an alley, but it's not a public alley. It's basically a private development alley where. There we have 28-foot streets, but you have a wider alley, and everybody's garages come in on an alley, and nobody accesses the street. That's a really cool design.
I don't think in my
That's probably
entire career, which spans back to the mid-1980s, I don't think I've ever seen a subdivision proposal with alleys in it. Those are like traditional from...
It's new urbanism now.
Yeah. And they started going away in the 70s, I think.
And then,
more expensive to build.
Getting back to the outdoor storage that everybody loves, what do we do with the boats and the campers in this development again? I mean, is there going to be a set ordinance that goes right along with this development?
I don't think that we would want it to be different. And thinking of our inspectors that have to go out, and there's a maximum number of vehicles and boats and things that you can have on a lot. I don't think they should have to check to see if it's R1 or R1A or... No, I understand that. But I'm just saying, if a developer said, I'm going to jump in and I'm going to do this, I like this whole idea. A lot of them have covenants, and as a realtor, I think that would be something that could be in that ordinance, and that as we sell those lots, we make that new owner know, there's no outside storage here of campers and boats before they dive into this and then bring in, the duck boat and the speedboat. And
I'm with you on that. I mean, I think it just clutters things on a 50-foot lot where I've got limited.
It does, but the folks that, like the neighborhoods, let's take Dakota Commons, for instance, where I know that covenant exists. It probably exists all over, but I know that neighborhood has it. And it looks beautiful. You don't see anything stored outside. However, those are residents who can afford to rent a storage unit for their boat and snowmobile. And if we're talking about affordable housing, that's probably not the case.
Maybe you don't have that. I mean, we can make that assumption, but we all know that we drive through places in Watertown, and we know what the average incomes people are, and we know that people can afford to buy boats and campers and fish shacks, and so, or they get given to them by their parents or whatever. I mean, it's that they will go there, and you will find 28-foot campers parked in a side yard. Again, now I've got more impervious surface because of the roof of that camper.
Well, if we've got a 5 or a 6 foot side yard, you're not going to fit anything there.
You'll find ways. You'll find ways.
See, now I'm going to be the buyer that is sitting next to Todd that I don't have the camper, and his camper, I have to look at it every time I turn around, and you're just going to have that disgruntled.
We've just painfully gone through that whole process.
Right, and I would like to see that nipped in the bud before it even starts, is having that with those, when you buy that lot, you realize there is no outside storage. It's affordable housing. I don't care if you can afford 6 boats. They can't be stored here, but you're more than welcome to build an affordable home. I know I don't know if that can be done.
You might run into the people that aren't home much and they're always out doing stuff, so then they have a bunch of toys, and that could clutter up. And I feel like maybe a neighborhood or a developer, then they could create those covenants to market their development, and take care of it there, just so then we don't have to try to
an
regulate
extra
it.
thing that's different from the rest of the neighborhoods. It's going to be hard to enforce.
I agree. I don't think it should necessarily be a city thing, but any developer that would come to the city, I think that would be a really nice thing to, make them think maybe they should do that. Yeah, I don't think we want to police that, but I think it should be brought to the attention of that developer if that should ever come about.
Yeah, I agree.
Any other concerns that you have about, would you have misgivings in passing something like this?
I just think we need to determine where it can be applied, whether it can be used as a down zone from an R1, or up zones from 3 and 2 and 2A, minimum area that has to be included. And we kind of talked about that, but I think what Brandy's done a really good job in putting together, I think, parameters that we can probably live with. If 6 foot is the setback based on fire code, we'll go with the 6 foot. I would go with the rear yard of being 6 foot unless it's going to have a garage or an alley.
Mm-hmm.
Because I don't want to have so many setbacks on here, then we can't build anything either.
Right. Or then that would leave the option open if they did have an alley in the back, and they could, maybe they could slant it so they could still get in there with the 50-foot lot. There was an example in one of the lots that I was looking at that they actually had a slanted garage then towards the alley. Just do a little.
No, very good work.
So the next time you see this, might be a public hearing to recommend approval.
Are there any communities in the state or in the nation that have done this successfully that we can, I guess, look at their
I just
lead?
Forwarded an email, a link. I'll forward it to the Plan Commission. Thief River Falls, Minnesota, is doing affordable housing with small lots and small price tags. And I'm all for not having to reinvent wheels. We can look at what they're doing, and they're doing it successfully, and they've been doing it for a number of years. It's exactly what we're talking about. And so there are models out there of successful ways to do this. And this is just one piece in the puzzle. But there are other items, too, with financing. And, if we can do some neighborhoods with TIF financing, the tax increment financing is being used in Thief River Falls to build these neighborhoods. If our community acknowledges the need, then we have what we need to move forward and get something passed. And I think we're beyond that point of the community acknowledging the need. And it's just a matter of putting it in black and white on paper and to the point where it's acceptable to the decision makers and letting somebody go with it.
And any rezone or new subdivision that would be utilizing this zone, you guys would see and review.
Right, public hearings. Yeah, this is just the first part. Then someone actually has to use it.
Yeah.
They zone something, then it comes back to you again, and you can say, not the right neighborhood, or go for it.
And I would appreciate graphics as you're putting the ordinance together, I think that's the best way that we can be doing things in the future when we're trying to define things, is to show pictures. Whether we draw with a standard lot and what the setbacks look like, and then the buildable area when we're talking about different zones. I think it's just the best way of handling it, because as opposed to trying to read 3 paragraphs of what you can see with a picture.
It would be good to, back to those couple examples that you had on the smaller lot sizes too, if we could get some sort of market price estimate so that we could look at, potential limitation of accessory structure size or things along those lines.
All you gotta do is you go to your website, click on, and you can get the assessed value on those properties.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can look at that, and just to, at the next time we come forward, maybe have some dollar amounts, and it's, what it sells for and what it costs to build. That part is, I'm struggling with that. I think that we don't necessarily want to let it be a free market. We might want to be controlling a program where eligible buyers get it below market. And I don't know how to do that totally yet.
Well, I think we can do that through a TIF. If the condition of the TIF, if the person wants to establish a TIF for affordable housing, that those houses, well, right now state law has been changed anyway, that they have to be in a certain price point anyway, and we can always be more restrictive than that.
Yeah.
What's the square footage on like the Governor's House project? I mean, what are the square footage of those homes and
they're
the kind of the
25 by 50.
The new one that's coming
smaller.
out with a 3-bedroom, I think, is just a little over 1,100 square feet.
They have different models.
And is there data with those? I mean, are they adding garages onto those, or
they don't come with a garage? I mean, you have to. That's on your own.
Correct. But does that model? I mean, on our 50-foot lot.
They got 2 different ways they're building them. They've got a standard ranch style look that can fit on a wider lot, and then they have a model that can be spun to put on narrower lots. A 50-foot lot width a Governor's House can make that work.
Could you say what the range was? I mean, the price range? I mean, where you're trying to slot this, the affordable houses would be in?
Around $150,000 is the goal. And that's really, really hard to do. That's almost impossible to do with a basement and a garage.
And without free land.
So, I mean, one or the other. Crawl space, garage. Or full basement, no garage.
Yeah, the 3-bedroom Governor's House is a 24 by 50. And and then the 2-bedroom is a 24 by 42. So either one of those would
Ray,
would
can you
work.
put my screen on once? Okay, this is a neighborhood in Marshall, Minnesota, that this development was essentially completed by about the time that I moved to the community, which was in 2006. This was their attempt at low-income housing. And each one of most of these houses were built as spec houses. So they were partially, mostly with very minimal improvements in the basement. So they had basements, and they had houses. Some of them are 2-story. Most are not. These were all in the $150,000 price range. And I believe this neighborhood was built with a TIF. That's how they managed to control the prices. And they did have income guidelines and all that stuff. But these are about the size of lots that we're talking and about the size of houses that you're talking. So this is kind of the modern spin on exactly what the mayor's vision is, I think.
It's being done elsewhere, so I think we can do it here. Any other thing you want us to stick in there before we bring it back?
Oh, I think
it looks good.
Good job.
Thank you.
Good work.
Sure. You're welcome. Thanks, Brandy.
Thank you guys for your input.
Okay, moving on to item 5 is new business. Any new business?
I had contacted Brandy a few days ago. After the city council meeting on Monday, both the mayor and Don Roby had made a good suggestion in reference to the street vacation that we recently saw. I guess I didn't. I got to miss out on that. But and just talking about creating some sort of a procedure so it's a little bit more procedural and we maybe have a little bit narrower scope of our inquiry. And to that end, I just briefly blasted out an email that had just a couple of sort of ideas of some things that we see in sort of the legal world. And a lot of times we use these, in a lot of cases, we use these little, what I would call like a factor test to make decisions. Or a judge would make that decision. So Mr. Roby's probably pretty familiar with the way these things look. I don't know if this applies or if this would be a good idea. It was an idea that I had for a part of a procedure for street vacations. That way we maybe have a little smoother time next time.
I think it's a really good idea, and I know Shane has also been working at it from a staff perspective. He had informed us the other day at a meeting, and I think we need to go somewhere. We don't have to be locked into that, if you don't do these, you don't get it, but I think I like your language here that it's more of the suggestive as a prescriptive, because we know, I think the city council said every one of these things are going to be different and they don't want to be locked into checking the box. But I think it helps us, and it helps staff when they're talking to people, will you be prepared to answer these questions? So when we ask them, and then if we can move it forward. And I think, Shane was going to maybe come back with something else and we can add on to this.
Actually, all these points that were made in this handout are very similar to the ones that we've already started to identify as what we need to vet. And something that was difficult to convey is behind the scenes, a lot of times staff is vetting all of these things, but because we didn't have a defined procedure, even though we have the discussions, there's no record of it. Right. So by creating the procedure, then there'll be a record of it, and I think it's clearly going to help everybody that's involved in the process.
And I don't know if it should be primarily a staff procedure or if it should be a staff procedure that reflects an ordinance that the planning commission has to abide by. I mean, I'm open to any ideas or suggestions. I don't know what the best sort of mechanism of implementing that is.
Right, correct. Our procedure right now, we don't really have any language in our ordinance, but our process is identified with complying with the state law. So even if we just stay with the state law and don't have any additional language in our ordinance, a procedure helps in either fashion. So we're definitely all for it.
Yeah.
Is it something that, and Matt, this might be a question for you, that we could have these questions be answered in the petition process?
Well, excuse me. The petition has to lay out how it's a public improvement, or excuse me, how it's a public benefit. Yeah, you probably could add additional requirements on the petition to have them indicate how they meet these certain factors.
Mm-hmm. Just where they would go more in depth, because like you said, right now they do have to say why it's to the public's benefit to vacate. But yeah, then this would just have them look into it a little further, and then maybe if they couldn't answer a question, maybe they would wonder how they would get the vacation passed as well, or approved.
Yeah, I think it's really good. I like all the points here, and I realize staff does vet this kind of behind the scenes on all these situations. It just occurred to me as you were saying that we get this one-page staff report on conditional use where you go through a lot of the vetting of the different ordinances that we have, and maybe in this case for these situations it'd be good to get kind of a summary document that's very similar to that, where we kind of address some of these concerns and how they would impact the community and enter it into the public record.
That's what we usually have on our request for action. We're just not as thorough as Board of Adjustment. But we try to give the facts and background on that. Yeah. And we can incorporate that to make it more standard to Board of Adjustment's procedure, just so it lays it all out there and
I don't want you to have to spend a lot of time because hopefully this only happens once every 4 or 5 years, and so we
Right.
don't need to be expending a lot of time and effort doing this. But again, as opposed to it landing in our lap in a couple days and we have to react, I'd rather be proactive on it. And so if you guys know what the questions that you're asking them, or you know what we've been talking about here, you guys vet that, and then if that's part of the report, just give it to us, and I'm fine
Yeah.
with that. But if it means a formal policy, I'm okay with that too.
Or, yeah, and if somebody is planning on coming forward with the vacation, then it's going to be public knowledge anyway. So if we would just give you guys heads up as new business and have it on an agenda, before the public hearing. And then any research that you guys want done, then you can get in touch with staff and we can provide that before the public hearing. Yep.
This was just based on something that Councilman Roby had brought up on Monday's meeting, and the mayor too, I think, both had mentioned it. So.
Yeah, and thank you for doing that. It's
The other thing as far as new business goes, I know it's preliminarily, but do we need to be having an election for new chairpersons? Is that something you want us to wait until you get a new person appointed, Madam Mayor?
I think it would be appropriate to wait, and it is my intention to make an official appointment at the next council meeting.
Okay.
And then, I mean, you can think about amongst yourselves who you would like to be your chair.
Blake.
Right now, I mean, until that happens, it would be Blake, because he was the vice.
Yeah.
And
unless we want to railroad somebody else in. Not me. Then the other thing too, that just to put so once that happens, I almost think too, then I would like to see, we've talked a little bit about this at the staff level, is coming back and adopting bylaws for the board, the planning commission, and the board of adjustment on how we make decisions, how we do business, how we have some standard findings that we adopt, so that become part of our record every time we make a decision. So I'd like to work on that as well.
Do you know who could spearhead that?
I know somebody.
First district, maybe Luke.
Oh, the other we're in the board. Well, the other thing is I believe that the first district and Luke Muller will be presenting the comprehensive land use plan to the planning commission in an upcoming meeting, and we should be getting a notice, and it's a 380-page document, so people are going to have to spend some time looking at that. But I know his intent is to bring that to the planning commission, let us take a look at it, and then probably a community meeting later in late May, early June, and then taking it to an adoption process in July, so that we can put that project to bed.
Very good.
Thanks, Todd. Any other new business? Old business? Get a motion to adjourn?
I'll move.
Second.
We're adjourned.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.